Yoon administration announces its tax code revision plan, aiming to revitalize the economy by promoting growth led by the private sector. Also announced a possible drop in the top rate of corporate tax to 22%, as well as tax relief for the country's semiconductor industry. South Korea's aim to be a global pivotal state is at the heart of the new government's foreign policy. President Yoon Suk-yeol was briefed for more than 2 hours by the foreign minister on Thursday on Seoul's major diplomatic priorities. The European Central Bank raises interest rates for the first time in 11 years and surprises markets with an unexpected 50 basis point jump. The move comes to tame the ongoing global inflation.
Good morning and welcome to New Day at Arirang. The Yoon administration unveiled its plans yesterday for a tax code revision. And in line with pledges made by the new president, the focus is very much on the growth of the country's private sector.
It also aims to help the nation overcome what's been labeled a complex crisis by supporting businesses and people's livelihoods. The government plans to deliver this proposal to the National Assembly by September to pass the bill. Ji-young starts us off.
Revitalizing the economy by promoting growth led by the private sector. That's the crux of South Korea's latest revision to the tax code published on Thursday with the goal of improving corporate competitiveness.
The tax revision has put an emphasis on drastically increasing support for companies to expand their investment and employment. First, the taxation system will be reformed to meet global standards.
Lowering the top rate of corporate tax from the current 25% to 22% is one of the main changes. Also, the government will help smaller businesses by putting more companies into the lowest corporate tax bracket. Also in the spotlight are changes in the real estate taxes. The government is looking to ease the property tax burden for people amid runaway home prices. In South Korea, people or companies with large real estate assets get an extra tax bill for holding properties on top of the standard property tax. For owners of 2 or more residential properties, the threshold before having to pay this extra tax will be raised from the current 600 million won to 900 million won, which is roughly $700,000. Also, for those who own just one home, it'll be raised next year from the current 1.1 billion won to 1.2 billion won, which is just over $900,000. And just for this year, it'll be temporarily raised to 1.4 billion won. The way of calculating property ownership tax will also change. Currently, greater tax rates are applied for owning more houses, but under the change, tax rates will depend on the house price. An expert says this can make property taxes better balanced.
Currently, a person who has 3 houses worth a total of 2 billion won will pay more taxes than another person who just owns one home worth 3 billion won. If we look at it in terms of money, it is not equitable.
Another major goal of the tax code revision is to provide more financial stability for the public amid soaring inflation. The government will reduce the tax burden on those in low-income brackets.
We will reduce the tax burden on people by expanding the range of the 2 lowest income tax brackets. But those earning more than 120 million won will see the amount they can deduct from their income tax reduced.
Chu added that for workers, more meal expenses will be exempt from tax. The limit for tax-free meals at work will be doubled to 200,000 won or roughly $150 a month. The government is also looking to help industries recover from the pandemic. To help the movie industry recover, the government is also making movie tickets tax-deductible from July next year. Those earning less than $53,000 a year can get 30% of their spending at movie theaters deducted from their income tax bill. With all these changes, the government says the tax code revision will result in a roughly $10 billion drop in tax revenue. But the finance minister says the reduction accounts for 3% of total tax revenue, which is within the usual 5% annual rise in tax revenue. The government is going to send the bill to the National Assembly by September. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The government also has plans to boost the local semiconductor industry to make it a world-class production hub and a leader in cutting-edge chip tech. Lee Dae-yeon has the details.
More investment in the semiconductor industry. That's the plan announced by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday while visiting a chip material factory in the city of Hwasong, south of Seoul. The blueprint to boost the chip industry includes 3 major points. First, to encourage chip-related companies to invest over 300 trillion won, or about $260 billion in the next 5 years. The administration also aims to boost government spending on essential infrastructure for chip complexes, like electricity and industrial water. There will be more tax benefits, too, for investment in semiconductor equipment and R&D. Tax deductions for large companies that invest in equipment related to nationally strategic technologies like semiconductors will be raised by 2 percentage points to around 8 to 12%. But one expert says those rates need to go higher.
The US and European countries are trying to pass legislation to increase tax deductions for chip-related companies to 30 to 50%. If those bills pass, Korea should raise its deductions by even more.
The second point is training new talent. The government aims to train more than 150,000 people for the semiconductor industry by 2031 and designate graduate schools specializing in chip, which will entitle them to more support for instructors and class materials. The first thing they need to do, experts say, is to bring on more faculty.
Chip-related institutions these days lack faculty. One idea could be to recruit people who work hands-on in semiconductors as instructors.
Also, the government's going to work with the chip industry to establish a semiconductor institution for students, job seekers, and other workers in 2023 and train 3,600 people within 5 years. Last but not least, the government will bolster support for R&D in the next-generation logic semiconductors. It aims to increase Korea's global market share in logic chips from the current 3% to 10% by 2030. It's also going to provide some 950 billion won, or more than $700 million, for feasibility studies on power semiconductors and automotive chips. Another goal is for Korea to achieve a self-sufficiency rate in semiconductor parts of 50% by 2030 by expanding support for R&D. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's foreign ministry has briefed President Yoon Suk-yeol on its core policy plans. There, the president called for active diplomacy to meet the country's national interest of becoming a global pivotal state. Our Kim Da-mi with the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has once again placed emphasis on the importance of economic diplomacy, pledging to do all he can to help South Korea's economy. Further, such comments came on Thursday after South Korea's foreign minister briefed President Yoon on the ministry's policy agenda.
President Yoon said economic diplomacy is what's most important. He said he will visit anywhere if it helps our economy.
He then called for active diplomacy that leads global solidarity and cooperation, as well as a diplomacy with the US, China, and Japan based on a strong Seoul-Washington alliance. Winning the city of Busan the right to host the 2030 World Expo topped the president's order to the top diplomat. The president also made sure to touch on China's backlash against South Korea's participation in reorganizing the global supply chain. Park said he also ordered active diplomacy so that China does not misunderstand, making sure that there is explanation in advance and misunderstandings can be sorted out. Park added that Seoul's participation in the IPEF and possibly in Fab 4, another US-led chip alliance that would involve Japan and Taiwan, is not to ostracize a certain country but to maximize national interests. There will also be a, quote, bold plan to stop North Korea from showing off its military capabilities.
We will lay out the roadmap for the North's denuclearization and for the normalization and fundamental development of inter-Korean relations.
During Thursday's briefing, Yoon further expressed a strong will to soften bilateral ties with Japan so that the two countries can build trust that is mutually beneficial. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea's producer price index, a key barometer of future inflation, hit a record high in June. The Bank of Korea said on Friday the index came to 120.04, up 0.5% from May, rising on month for the 6th month in a row. It's a jump of nearly 10% compared to the same time last year, marking the 19th straight month of on-year increase. Prices were higher for agricultural and petroleum products, onions up 84% and gasoline up more than 11% compared to the month before. But the Bank of Korea says the rate of on-month growth has been slowing since April with a drop in some commodity prices. The European Central Bank has delivered its first interest rate hike in over a decade, joining its global peers in the race to get on top of surging inflation. Kim Yo-sun has more.
The European Central Bank decided Thursday to raise its interest rates by a larger than expected half percentage point. The bank's first rate hike in 11 years, which now takes its key interest rate to 0%.
I think, it's the first time in over a decade that we raise interest rates. And moving out of negative interest rates, by all accounts, certainly to me, is going to facilitate a number of things that we can explain to European citizens in order to help them understand what we are trying to do in order to reduce inflation and in order to procure price stability.
The bold move comes as continuing inflation, which hit a record 8.6% in June, adds to concerns about growth, while the Eurozone is still suffering from the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Amid a continued increase in consumer prices, the ECB had previously signaled it would be increasing rates in July and September. But it was unclear whether it would go as far as rising rates to 0. The bank's deposit rate is now 0%, the main refinancing operations rate is 0.5%, and the marginal lending facility is at 0.75%. The ECB also announced that it would provide extra help for the 19-country currency bloc's more indebted countries like Italy through a new bond purchase scheme. This, it says, is aimed at capping the rise in their borrowing costs and limiting financial fragmentation. Following the announcement, the euro rose to a session high on Thursday to trade at $1.02. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. If you're Korean, at one point in your life, you must have wondered, how is it scientifically possible that I'm so good looking? Well, it turns out the look has been around for around 1,700 years.
Well, jokes aside, last month a study was published in Current Biology, a renowned science journal, which revealed that the faces of ancient Koreans from between 15 and 1,700 years ago were very similar to that of Koreans today. And well, to find out more about what this new study could provide going forward, we have Chun Sung-won, Director of Bioinformatics Division at Genomics Inc. with us today. A very good morning to you, Mr. Chun.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. And well, my first question to you, could you briefly walk us through why your team started this research and how it was conducted?
Yeah, first, this project was the large-scale research collaboration. So we joined the international research team, which includes University of Vienna and the museum in Korea. The Three Kingdom period is very critical time point in the cultural and genetic formation of modern Koreans. Also, there has been no samples from this period sequenced and analyzed yet. So it should be the important scientific resource for understanding Korean history. So we are very thankful for the archaeologists who excavate the bones and the museums that allow us to analyze the samples. Also, every collaborators has their own roles. The museum and archaeologists, they obtain the samples and they give us the permissions. And University of Vienna, they extract the DNA from the bone and they do the sequencing. Also, we have the company called Parabon Nanorep. They predicted the face based on the genomic data. And most of the bioinformatics analysis was done by the University of Vienna and us. Yeah.
Right, so that's some of the backgrounds and how the study was done, but what about the results? How close are we compared to 1700 years ago?
Actually, the resolution of the prediction was not high, to be honest. But we can compare the phenotypes of the ancient samples and modern human. Actually, the 8 individuals is not enough to reconstruct all face diversity in Korea. However, we can tell that all the 8 individuals has brown eyes and dark hair. Also, there was some variation in facial shapes and the variation of the skin tones and some variation in eyelid morphology. All these features are the common features in modern Korean as well. So therefore, it means the facial features suggest genomic continuity in Korea for past 1700 years.
And well, let's compare it to other studies in other countries. What have other places around the world done with this kind of study, and how significant is the result of Koreans compared to studies done elsewhere?
Yeah, actually, many studies have investigated the genetic continuity of their target population. Also, forensic facial reconstruction using skulls alone is being done since 1895. So this is not kind of new technology. But in case when the skull is not available, it gets tricky. So DNA-only based prediction can help. There is information on only one similar studies on Egyptian mummies. But to my knowledge, this is not published yet. However, this doesn't mean the DNA-based facial feature prediction is a new technology. Actually, it's used by the forensic department to help solve the cold case of the decades. Yeah.
Okay, so now going back to the study that you've done, you've briefly touched this before, but where do you go from now? What are the results going to lead us as humanity when we find, 1700 years ago, faces from 1700 years ago?
Oh, yeah. First of all, this is the first ancient genome study from inside the Korean peninsula in Three Kingdom period. So this study explores genetic relationship of 8 ancient individuals who lived in Gaya kingdoms 1700 years ago and modern Koreans. This study could answer such questions like where these 8 individuals, ancestors of modern Koreans, how close the populations from Japan, Korea, and China were 1700 years ago. Also, were the Koreans already genetically homogeneous during this Three Kingdom period? Another question can be what these 8 individuals were like. Yeah. It is important to note that we observed genetic diversity in just 8 individuals. Yeah.
And well, going back to Toyoon's question, really, well, nowadays, K-pop is very much a huge worldwide phenomenon that people are really admiring everywhere. And well, how would you really then define the K-pop look, and how does it tie into the just the generations of evolution that we had in terms of our facial features?
Oh, so sorry. Can you repeat?
Right. So, how has the Korean look really evolved to what we have today? As we can see today, the K-pop look that many artists feature.
Oh yeah. I don't 100% understand your question, but normally the modern Koreans has some features like dark hair and brown eyes. So we can also find the features in the ancient genomes.
Right, I see. And
yeah.
Well, what are your future plans for your project going forward?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So this is the only ancient genome data in Korean peninsula in Three Kingdom period. This more south part. So if we can get some data from the north part, we can connect the dots of the Korean human evolution.
I see. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Hope you have a lovely weekend and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that wraps up the first half of New Day at Arirang. But stick around because when we come back,
we're going to invite an expert into our studio to discuss further on the tax code revision proposed by the Yoon government. So what will be the major changes from the previous progressive government to now conservative government? We're going to delve deep into it, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean new Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
welcome back to New Day at Arirang. Now to the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea, where the country is continuing to see an increase in virus cases week on week.
According to data compiled by local governments, 66,491 infections were reported as of 9 p.m. Thursday. That's down more than 2,000 from the same time the day before. However, the figure is almost double what was recorded a week ago. The recent rise has been attributed to new and possibly more immunity-invading BA.5 and BA.7.5 subvariants. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency is recommending high-risk groups and those aged 50 and above to get their second booster shots. From next month, a large-scale investigation on long-term effects of the virus, known as long COVID, will be launched. US President Joe Biden has tested positive for COVID-19 and is isolating with very mild symptoms. That's according to the White House on Thursday, saying Biden had begun taking Paxlovid, an antiviral drug designed to reduce the severity of the disease. It's added that he was isolating in the family quarters of the White House and is continuing to carry out all of his duties. The news comes as the new variants continue to pose a challenge to the nation's efforts to return to normal after 2.5 years of the pandemic.
The nation's culture minister reported to President Yoon major work plans for the future. Among a variety of goals, the core was to transform Cheong Wa Dae, the former presidential office and the residence, into a new cultural centerpiece. Kim Bo-kyung explains further.
South Korea's new cultural landmark. That's the vision for the former presidential office, the Blue House, or Cheong Wa Dae. On Thursday, Culture Minister Park Bo-kyun reported to President Yoon Suk-yeol on the 5 major goals ministry has in mind. They include turning the Blue House into a living, breathing cultural hub.
People think of Cheong Wa Dae as just a landscape, somewhere static. In the next stage, Cheong Wa Dae should be given to the people as a place that's alive.
This is the first time that the government has unveiled detailed plans for this historical place since it was opened to the public in May. Making use of the hundreds of artworks, memorabilia of former presidents, the 50,000 trees, as well as the cultural assets in the compound, the facility will become an art museum and cultural complex. The indoor area of the main office building and the official residence will be used as an exhibition venues, like France's Versailles Palace. Yeongbing관, where large-scale meetings and official events for state guests were held, will be filled with well-known contemporary and modern artwork such as the Lee Gun-hee collection. Other main goals have also been revealed. There will be financial support for K-content to nurture 10,000 industry professionals over the next 3 years, a fund of $30 million to create more K-dramas for online streaming services, and a $3.6 billion investment to create a global content company like Disney. The ministry will also support the pure art sector, often the sources of K-culture, guarantee fair access for people with disabilities, and develop regional culture centers for balanced development. Through this financial support, South Korea aims to further establish itself as a self-power giant. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Starting Friday, there will be a major change to the Changgyeonggung Palace and Jongmyo Shrine. The Joseon Dynasty cultural heritage sites will be connected again. Song Yoo-jin provides a glimpse of what to expect.
The Jongno-gu district, located in downtown Seoul, has been the heart of culture in the city for the last 600 years, following the establishment of the Joseon Dynasty. It's the home to a plethora of cultural heritage locations. One of them is South Korea's first UNESCO World Heritage Site, Jongmyo Shrine, that honors kings, queens, and long-deceased royal ancestors. Another is Changgyeonggung Palace, which, in its day, often served as the residence for queens and concubines. Until the early 20th century, the two sites were connected by a forest. But that all changed under Japanese colonization.
Most people in Joseon during the early 1900s walked around or rode carriages. However, the Japanese wanted a road system centered around cars. So they decided to create new straight roads that were fit for driving. That's why this road, which is now called Yulgongno, was opened in April of 1932.
Before, Changgyeonggung Palace and Jongmyo Shrine were divided by a road and a pedestrian overpass. But now, for the first time in 90 years, they're connected once again after more than 10 years of work. The city has now replaced the road with an underpass, creating an 8,000 square meter unbroken green area linking the two sites. The area also features a restored 503-meter-long wall that had been destroyed by Japan during the colonial period, with about 20% of the material used in its construction coming from the original. The Buksinmun entrance that kings once used to unofficially visit Jongmyo Shrine from Changgyeonggung Palace has also been reconstructed. Another new addition is the 340-meter-long walkway where visitors can take a look at the palace and shrine closely. Both the general public and the city government are excited about the project.
I decided to visit here during my stay in Seoul because it's historically meaningful that an area that was ruined under Japanese occupation has reopened.
This project helped us restore a part of our history which was disconnected by Japanese colonization. Also, in the past, palaces and shrines were only accessible to the royal family. By opening this area to the public, we hope more people can better understand the history revolving around these heritage sites.
The area will be fully open to the public from Friday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, South Korea is planning major tax cuts to boost businesses and livelihoods. The Finance Ministry on Thursday unveiled its proposal to revise the tax code, which reflects the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's drive to create a market-oriented economy where economic growth and jobs are created organically through greater business activities. Now, we discussed the major changes and whether the small government measures will likely lead to a bigger economy and income for South Koreans. And for this, I'm joined in studio by Professor Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. It's lovely to see you in person, Professor.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And well, my first question to you, it seemed like the headline line really from this tax code revision plan is the corporate tax cuts from 25% to 22%, and also some tax waivers or tax reductions, I suppose, for that would largely favour a lot of conglomerates here and large companies. So will these big cuts to corporate tax really translate into a better economy for South Korea?
I don't think it's likely in the short term. In the long term, it may help, but not in the short term. And there's two, I think, major reasons. The first is that even though we keep talking about the corporate tax cuts, the top corporate tax cuts have been cut from 25% to 22%. But for most of the rest of the firms, tax rates haven't changed. Only the firms which were paying the very top corporate tax rate of 25%, and some small and medium-sized companies whose tax rates were cut to 10%. Except for those two groups, the other firms didn't really have a tax cut. So I don't think there's going to be a big increase in investment for most of the companies in Korea. And then the second reason is that, during the latter part of 2010s, before the pandemic, there were a lot of countries which did cut corporate taxes. They were in sort of a race to cut taxes because they felt that they were losing businesses to countries with very low corporate taxes. And if you look at those countries, and perhaps specifically in the United States, which had a corporate tax cut in 2017, when they had the tax cut, they didn't really have any increases in investment. In fact, in the United States, they used the savings from the tax cuts to buy back their stock, to raise the prices of their stock for the most part. So it is very doubtful that the tax cuts will show up instantly on Korea's investment. But there is some evidence that if you look at the long term, say 5-10 years, then the corporate tax cuts do help increase investment. But what you need first is increase in demand, because no company makes an investment if they're not sure that they're going to sell goods. So if you have an increase in demand, then the companies will make investments. And if you have a lower tax rate, they will make somewhat more investment than they would have. So it may help in the medium and long run. But if you want to look at investments, say this year or early next year, it's probably not going to help much.
Right, and well, with the Yoon administration being quite pro-business, they've been trying to get local companies on board and really invest in domestic production, facilities, infrastructure and such, and of course create jobs. But they also want to attract some foreign business as well. And do you think the latest tax code the proposed changes are going to really help with that?
Well, I think it's basically same thing with foreign firms that we see in domestic firms. If they see a lower tax rate, they may make some additional investment that they would not have. But fundamentally, decision on investment depends on productivity, profitability, of which tax rate is just one factor. So it'll help us marginally, but will it help completely change the minds of foreign investors? Probably not, but if they were planning on investing in Korea anyway, they may do a bit more investment than they would have.
And the administration, even before it was inaugurated, they were talking about stabilizing people's livelihoods, and that was supposed to be one of the core points of this tax code revision scheme. And well, are there any measures targeted to achieve that, and will they be enough?
Well, as I said, for some small and medium-sized companies, they got booted down to the lowest tax rates. And then for income taxes. For lower and middle income workers, their category, their amount that their tax rates belong in, they have been adjusted somewhat. The workers subject to lowest income tax rate of 6%. The lower bound for income was raised from 12 million won to 14 million won. And the upper bound for the next tier of income taxpayers at 15% income tax was raised from 46 million to 50 million won. And because the average Korean income is about 37 million won, median is 24 million won, most middle class and lower class, lower income, middle income workers will see some kind of a benefit, and the government estimates that that's going to be about 800,000 won per taxpayer. But there is some problems with the government calculations, I think. Because of the inflation that we're going to have this year, most people are going to probably get some kind of a pay raise. It's not going to be as high as the inflation rate, so in terms of purchasing power, their income will probably go down. But still, because their money income, their nominal income has gone up, they will probably pay more taxes. So the amount of 800,000 won as an average gain for a taxpayer, I think that's the upper limit. I think most people will get less than that. And it's somewhat worrisome that they did not change the bounds for all the categories, not only the income taxes, but also the corporate taxes, to consider what happens with inflation, because even with corporate taxes, because of inflation, their revenues are going to go up, and their taxable revenues are probably going to go up as well, even though the real amount in terms of purchasing power, incomes, and revenues are going to go down. But because they made more in nominal terms, their tax actually is going to go up. So this reform has cut down the tax rate somewhat, but it didn't really adjust for inflation. So I think there will be some benefits to taxpayers on the income side, but it won't be as large as the government wants.
Right. Well, inflation is just adding uncertainty to everything, it seems. Well, on top of taxes, though, most Korean workers or employees, they pay into the national pension scheme, of course, and there have been calls to make reforms to that. So first, why is this important, and how should the government go about doing it?
Okay, I think they're pushing the pension reforms into more of a long run, but we do need changes in the pension system, basically because there's the demographics problem, where there's yet less young people paying into the system and more older people, retired people, who's going to take money out of the system. So right now, the Korean Economic Research Institute estimates that the pension system will get into red in 2037 and go broke by 2055 unless they make changes. And then secondly, there were problems with past politics where they raised benefits and lowered payments because, well, back in the days when we had a lot of young people and not very many old people, there was a lot of money coming into the system, so they felt that they could just spend to get political benefits. And then there's also pressure for national pension to prop up the stock market or get the companies to do the right thing, whether it be environmental or social. When they do that, they sometimes ignore profitability and returns. So that could reduce the money coming in to the pension system. And then there are some serious questions on how much everyday Koreans are preparing for their retirement because, well, there's so much things that you have to spend money now on. So the pension system, while people may not agree on which year that it will face problems, it will definitely face problems, so it needs a reform, and the reform will probably have to take the place of paying more when you're young and either getting less when you're older or getting money later than you're scheduled to right now.
And well, as you said, the demographic issue that South Korea is facing, it's very rapidly aging society. Well, it really raises the question of social welfare and how much we pay into it, how much we get out of it. But normally when tax cuts are made, of course, it usually means less spending. And with this revision scheme introducing a lot of tax cuts, it's estimated that there will be a reduction of around 13.1 trillion won in government revenue. That's around $9.9 billion. And well, should we be worried about this then?
Okay, that 13.1 trillion won takes place between 2023 and 2026. If you just look at 2023, that's 6.4 trillion won, and 2024, that's 7.3 trillion won. And the government actually expects the reduction in tax revenues to fall after that because the economy will start improving again. Now, there's some question on whether that assumption is valid. But if we take the numbers that the government has estimated, well, 6.4 trillion won and 7.3 trillion won in terms of government budget is not that much of money. The government budget this year is over 500 trillion won. So we should be able to handle 6 to 7 trillion won per year unless we suddenly decide to spend a lot more, say through supplemental budgets, or tax revenues fall even more because Korea faces a large-scale recession, neither of which seems likely at the moment. So we should probably be able to afford this type of tax cut, but again, if there are unforeseen situations arise, then as always, these type of estimates can go awry.
And well, what really is the worldwide trend right now? Are other governments around the world also introducing tax cuts?
Well, every democracy wants to cut taxes during election time, so there's always proposals to cut taxes. But the last time we had a major, say, wave of cut in taxes was, I think, between 2015 and 2020 before the pandemic, when some countries were trying to reduce corporate taxes because they felt that some countries which had very low corporate taxes were taking away business, say countries like Ireland, which has less than 15% corporate tax. That pressure has disappeared somewhat lately because the United States has been trying to set up a global minimum corporate tax, and the minimum tax rate there is 15%. So because we have a minimum tax now, though it hasn't started to become enforced yet, but because we have that treaty, I don't think countries are really excited about reducing the corporate tax rate at the moment. But reduction in income taxes, well, that can come in a few years when we see some more elections down the line.
I see. And well, the government also announced a 5-year blueprint for to really to invigorate the local semiconductor industry, and it's of course introduced very familiar looking measures such as boosting the personnel here, talent, local talent, infrastructure, education. So do you see them trying anything differently this time around?
Well, I think so far most of the policies that were announced is what they tried before, tax breaks, investment breaks, and so on. But there has been some moves to try to loosen up 52-hour workweek rule because, well, there's a lot of demand for semiconductors, and sometimes you may need to go beyond 52-hour per week. They need working hours to be much more flexible. And also for researchers, well, they don't quite punch the clock. So we may need some more flexibility there. And there has been a lot of complaints about regulations which stop these semiconductor companies from building new factories or expanding existing factories, as well as educational regulations which limit the number of people who major in semiconductor-related areas. All those areas are now targeted by the Yoon administration for regulatory reform, but it's questionable whether they'll, first of all, get political support from the National Assembly to change laws and regulations because it's right now mostly held by the opposition party. And then in terms of, say, factories, there's the NIMBY problem, not in my neighborhood. So it's questionable whether they'll be able to convince the people in the area as well as local governments to loosen up regulations. And we are already seeing some pushbacks from educational regulation reforms. The Yoon administration wants to get rid of a lot of regulations on number of students and establishing a new department in universities. But a lot of regional universities think that this will favor the universities in the Seoul metropolitan area. So they think that it'll accelerate the process where they lose students to Seoul-based universities. So they're right now pulling up political opposition to Yoon's semiconductor education plans.
Right, so it's not really that straightforward, it seems. And well, quickly before we go, well, this whole tax revision proposal, it seems quite dependent on the trickle-down effect. It's trying to trigger more business activities, and naturally that would hopefully help the invisible hand redistribute naturally and make people's income greater without government intervention. And well, do you think that this is going to work? How can the government try and make this trickle-down effect work over the next 5 years?
I don't think trickle-down system really works that much. And right now, it does seem like only the very top corporations are getting effective tax cuts. I was somewhat disappointed because they did not readjust the categories for all taxes. They did not reduce taxes for all companies. They did not reduce taxes for everybody up to everybody accepting upper income. They kept the current barriers, they kept the current income levels that for the tax rates. So for most companies, they will not be really getting a tax cut. And in fact, as I mentioned before, because of inflation, because the money amount of revenues will go up, they may actually see a tax increase. So in that sense, I was a bit disappointed here. Whether the trickle-down system will work, well, in Korea, if you have a large conglomerate who's investing more, that usually helps companies which are affiliated with that conglomerate, the people who supply parts and intermediate parts to those conglomerates. But there has been some controversy on whether how much of that benefit, tax cut benefits, investment benefits flow down to those suppliers. So it should have been a more comprehensive plan.
Right. Well, Professor, thank you so much for your insights today. And well, hopefully we'll see this tax revision scheme working and being revised somewhat before it's passed by the National Assembly so that it can include some of the points that you very rightly raised. So thank you so much for your time today, Professor.
Thank you.
For a look at the news from around the world now, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Hi Matt, let's start in Europe as the continent is seeing a resumption of gas supplies from Russia.
Well, that's right, So-young. After being shut down for 10 days since July 11th for supposed repairs, partial gas flows resumed on Thursday through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. But Russia's largest pipeline, running under the Baltic Sea into Germany, is only operating at 40% levels. And its resumption comes a day after Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that supplies could be reduced or even stopped. Before the temporary halt, the pipeline was only at 40% capacity due to Europe's opposition of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, despite the resumption, German officials are wary of potential future interruptions amid growing concerns about energy supplies this winter. They have accused Russia of weaponizing energy exports to, quote, blackmail Europe. Italy is looking at an early election following the resignation of the country's Prime Minister Mario Draghi. He will stay on as caretaker leader until early elections are held on September 25th. Draghi's second resignation request in a week was accepted on Thursday by President Sergio Mattarella. This comes after three parties in Draghi's fractured coalition government refused to back him in a confidence vote on Wednesday. Italy's parliament has now been dissolved ahead of the elections. In our final story, India has selected a tribal leader as its president for the first time. Lawmakers voting for India's president on Thursday backed Draupadi Murmu, a former teacher and member of the Santhal community, one of India's largest tribal groups. The 64-year-old will now become the second woman to hold the largely ceremonial presidential seat, and she is set to start her 5-year term from July 25th. The move is seen as an attempt by India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party to build support among India's 100 million tribal people.
Good morning. Have an umbrella handy. We have passing rain in the forecast across Korea. And for now, we are looking at rain in the capital after lunch. Precipitation can vary depending on where you are. Meanwhile, east of Gangwon-do province will see rain into this afternoon. Most regions had relief from the heat yesterday, but it was a sweltering day for Daegu and many parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces. But there will be a big jump in the highs for most parts, so a muggy day to end a work week. Bearable morning temperatures for most regions with some scattered rain in the south this morning. Then highs in Seoul, Gwangju, Daejeon will be at 30 degrees Celsius. Southern regions in Jeju Island will have very high UV rays today. Now the monsoonal front returns this weekend. Rain starts from the west on Saturday night before spreading to the rest of the country. Rain should let up on Sunday morning in the south, but central regions will see rain through Sunday night. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. Well, that brings us to the end of this newscast, but do tune in to our later newscast to have some updates on these stories and more.
Happy Friday and have a great weekend. Take care.